Hi everyone, welcome to a short video presentation on behaviorism. This video is mainly intended for teaching professionals, psychology students, and aspiring or current instructional designers. After going through the contents of this video, you will be able to explain what behaviorism is, identify the characteristics of behaviorism as a learning theory, list the two types of conditioning that make up the behaviorist theory, describe the basic features of classical conditioning, and describe the basic features of operant conditioning. Behaviorism is an approach in the field of psychology that is based on observable behavior and the assumption that all behaviors seen in an organism, be it an animal or a human, are the result of the organism's interaction with its environment. This psychological approach believes that when a human being or an animal is born, its mind is tabula rasa, that is, a blank slate. All behaviors that the organism learns from thereon are shaped by its external environment or its prior stimuli. Behaviorism only concerns itself with an organism's behaviors that are observable and objective in nature and does not take into account its subjective, internal thoughts, consciousness, feelings, and emotions. In the context of education, behaviorism as a learning theory relies on the instructor or teacher or the more powerful person acting as the conveyor of knowledge, while the student or the weaker person acts as the receiver of knowledge. In the behaviorist learning approach, learners play a passive role in the learning process, and learning is largely teacher-centered. This type of learning approach can be beneficial in teaching facts, standards, and definitions, and mainly concentrates on instilling lower-order skills such as recalling and listing. However, in order for learning brought about through the behaviorist approach to be retained, intermittent reinforcement is necessary. Lack of such reinforcement may lead to the learning being forgotten. According to the behaviorist theory, an organism can learn new behaviors through two types of conditioning: classical conditioning and operant conditioning. In classical conditioning, an organism learns to respond to a neutral stimulus over time due to the continued association of the neutral stimulus with a previous unconditioned stimulus that brought about the same response. Classical conditioning mainly focuses on involuntary, observable behaviors of an organism. Classical conditioning was discovered by a Russian scientist, Ivan Pavlov, in the late 19th century while he was experimenting with dogs. Pavlov discovered that by repeatedly associating a neutral stimulus such as a ringing bell with an unconditioned stimulus such as food, over time, he could turn a natural or unconditioned response, which in this case was salivation, a natural response to food, into a conditioned response to the new conditioned stimulus. Some examples of classical conditioning are: if we once get sick after eating a certain kind of food, every time we look at the food, we feel nauseated. Because we fear the pain caused by weapons such as knives, robbers use such weapons to condition us to fear them as well. Now let's move on to operant conditioning. In operant conditioning, a behavior or response recurs more or less in future depending on its consequences or stimuli. Operant conditioning mainly focuses on voluntary, observable behaviors of an organism. It was discovered by a scientist named B.F. Skinner in the 1920s. According to Skinner, for any kind of behavior, there can be two types of consequences. The first is reinforcement, which is a consequence that makes the behavior more likely to occur again. The second is punishment, which is a consequence that makes the behavior less likely to occur again. Reinforcement can again be of two types. The first is positive reinforcement. When a behavior is followed by a pleasant consequence being added, it is called a positive reinforcement. For example, when we study hard, we get good grades. The good grades encourage us to study hard for our next test as well. Hence, the addition of the pleasant consequence has resulted in the behavior to recur. The second is negative reinforcement. When a behavior is followed by an unpleasant consequence being removed, it is called a negative reinforcement. For example, when we study hard, our parents stop nagging us. So the next time we have a test, we study hard so that our parents do not nag us, which is an unpleasant consequence being removed. Hence, the removal of the unpleasant consequence has resulted in behavior to recur. Similarly, punishment can also be of two types. The first is positive punishment. When a behavior is followed by an unpleasant consequence being added, it is called a positive punishment. For example, when we score poorly in a test, our parents make us wash dishes every day. The unpleasant consequence of washing dishes makes us stop scoring poorly in future tests. Hence, the addition of the unpleasant consequence has resulted in the behavior to decrease. The next is negative punishment. When a behavior is followed by a pleasant consequence being removed, it is called a negative punishment. For example, when we score poorly in a test, our parents restrict our playing and television times. The removal of the pleasant consequence of playing and watching television makes us stop scoring poorly in future tests. Hence, the removal of the pleasant consequence has resulted in the behavior to decrease. So that's all for this video, folks. Hope you all learned something new today. Thanks and see you in the next one. Bye-bye.